everyone. I am honored to be here today. Special thanks to Richard and Sharon and Sasha and Samantha for making that happen, and thanks to all of you for coming and being with me right now. This morning I'm here to talk to you about Alzheimer's and youth. Alzheimer's is the most feared disease. And why do you think that is? It's because Alzheimer's is isolating, it's humiliating, because there's no cure, no prevention, because there's so much stigma around the disease that people who are living with it are further isolated. And Alzheimer's has no bias. Alzheimer's doesn't care if you're rich or you're poor. It doesn't care where you live, what your geopolitics are, what your socioeconomics are. It doesn't care about your gender, your sex, or any other, whether you did something good in your life or whether you had any influence at all. So for all of these reasons, Alzheimer's is scary. Scientists have been trying for 100 years to come up with cures, and there's no prevention, no cure. And it looks like for the future of Alzheimer's, what the breakthroughs are going to impact people in the early stages. So now there are 47 million people in the world living with Alzheimer's. Those are just the reported cases. So what happens to those people? So as the baby boom generation is expanding, what we're finding is that the numbers of doctors getting into geriatrics, oh, I should actually start this thing too. The numbers of people getting into geriatrics are declining. And the problem of that is it's creating a crisis of care. So, sorry. If you look at this graph, you'll see for the first time, historically, there have been a few older people and there have been more younger people to support the older people. Now, for the first time in history, the percentage of elderly is increasing more rapidly for the first time ever than youth. And you'd say, well, it's a pyramid, there's enough younger people to support the older people, but caring for Alzheimer's is tricky. It's complicated, it needs training. And the people who are getting into that field are just declining in numbers. So we think the answer is in youth. I run a charity called Sweet Readers. We train middle school kids to connect with adults who have Alzheimer's through the arts. And we run programs in elder care centers, major museums, and school classrooms. Our mission is to empower young people to immediately revitalize adults living with Alzheimer's and to become catalysts for elder care excellence. These young people are our future doctors, providers of care, policymakers, and innovators. So this morning, I'd like to share two stories with you. The first story is about the power of youth to see people differently and to inspire others to do the same. It's the story of the founding of Sweet Readers. So back in 2010, my daughter Sophie, who was then 11 years old, and my mother, who was 88 and living with early stage Alzheimer's, had a little conflict. They just didn't know how to connect. So Sophie started reading to her grandmother. And it went so well that she decided she would go to her grandmother's day program. So in the room are 16 people with various levels of Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's is a complicated and progressive disease. So everyone deals with it a little bit differently. Some people are sleeping. Some people are really scared. They don't know what's going to happen. There hasn't been a child in their space ever. Sophie sits down on a piano bench. The 16 adults are in a horseshoe around her. And Sophie comes prepared with, oh, the places you'll go, Goodnight Moon, Caps for Sale, and Roly Poly Oly. She's all set. She sits down, marches in, and she starts reading these books. And within minutes, there's a hush over the room. The chaotic fear of the beginning is over. And a few minutes later, this incredible symbiotic joy fills the room. It's a sense of community immediately. They're finishing Sophie's sentences. They're finishing the rhymes. It's a dance. And I had never seen anything like it. So when the hour's over, Sophie skips out of there and is just ebullient. Mom, did you see this person? Did you see this? She was so mesmerized by the impact she was having that she just couldn't even contain herself. So I couldn't help but wonder, is this a fluke, or could any child have this impact? Is it possible that other kids could do what she's doing? So I called my mother's social worker and I asked her if she could come observe Sophie. that point, Sophie had moved beyond books and was doing poetry and art and really engaging the adults on a regular basis. So Ella came over, observed Sophie. We all sat down in a diner afterwards, and Ella said, okay, she has a gift. But you could look at what she's doing. You could break down those different movements that she's doing. How is she connecting? How is it that 16 adults consistently come to life? And you could start a training program so that any child anywhere could have the same impact. So a few days later, Sophie and I are walking in Central Park, and I say to Sophie, so how much do you think it would cost to end Alzheimer's? Sophie says, $1 million. I say, okay, well, what if millions of kids around the world flooded centers the way you did, lit up all these lives, and then fundraised, gave all the money to science, and ended the whole thing? And Sophie said, okay, so what would we call that? Would the group have a name? So we went back and forth. We decided Sweet Readers, sweet because at the time we were doing a lot of baking for my Mother's Day program, and Readers because it started with books and reading. It evolved way beyond that to become reading people. And so in any event, we had that little 3-minute conversation in the park, went on to talk about a million other things. The next day, Sophie comes home from school. She's in 5th grade at the time, and she says, Mom, everyone signed up. And I'm like, honey, what did they sign up for? And she said, I had forgotten the conversation. She said, they all want to be sweet readers. And I said, honey, we were just having a conversation in the park. We don't have a program. I don't even know anything about this. She looks at me like I'm from Mars and says, Mom, we talked about it. We had a plan. I told everyone, let's just do it. So I sat there and I thought, okay, makes sense. So at the time, my mother was doing programs at the American Folk Art Museum, at MoMA, and at the Met. And I thought, okay, I'll call those people and I'll ask them. The programs they were doing were engaging people with Alzheimer's and art with their care partners. And I thought, what if we built a community of kids? Would they help us do programming so that we could engage the adults and the kids through the art? And every museum said yes. In fact, within 6 months, we had pilots, first at the American Folk Art Museum and then at MoMA. And then we got a phone call from the Met saying they were having an exhibit for Faith Ringgold for her poetry quilt, and could I bring the Sweet Readers? And in that moment, I realized, wow, the Met's calling and asking if we can bring the Sweet Readers. I think we have something. So, since then, we're now in 3 countries. We've empowered kids in 40 different communities to bridge communities, to impact thousands of adults in London and Canada and Chicago and Washington and Connecticut. And it's impressive. And the kids are a wide range. Some of them are from schools with special needs. Some of them are from low-income schools. Some of them are from elite private schools. It doesn't matter, because just like Alzheimer's has no bias, the power of a child has no bias either. It doesn't matter if your life has been centered on your special need. It doesn't matter if you've come from an area of disadvantage. You still have this amazing ability to impact a life for the better. So we train kids to have one goal. It's to discover the person who's in there. We give them a set of tools, and it's really up to them to figure out, how do you do it? They've got science knowledge, they've got the arts, they've got human engagement skills training, they've got a peer support curricula, faculty, and community support, but it's really up to them to figure it out. And when they do, it's pretty magical. I don't know where I am in the speech at this point. So why middle school? Listen, it happened organically, but the truth is there's just an incredible thing that happens between a middle school child and someone in the early stages of Alzheimer's. So when you're in middle school, your brain is changing rapidly, your body is changing rapidly, and you're really not sure where you belong. You're not as cute as the little ones, and you're not as cool as the high school kids. It's a tricky time for kids. It's challenging. If you have Alzheimer's, your brain is changing rapidly, and your body is changing rapidly, and you're not sure if you're relevant anymore. You're not sure if you say something, if it's going to be out of context, if you're going to feel silly, and you're not sure if you even matter. So you have a choice if you're in your early stages of Alzheimer's. Are you going to retreat and just shut down, which is not going to be a good thing, because you're going to go through much more anxiety. It's going to ripple through your community, through your family. It's going to be miserable. If you're in a middle school, how you are influenced, for sure, is going to influence the trajectory of your life because you're in that very transformative time. So interestingly enough, when you take a middle school child and you connect them with someone who has Alzheimer's, these wonderful things happen. So both are looking for purpose. This child is with the adult, and they see the adult light up. How powerful is that? They just changed a life. The adult sees the reaction of the child and is also empowered. My God, I just saved that child. It is impossible to know who's getting a bigger benefit. And then there's patience. So someone who's got Alzheimer's, their brain is slowing. Their ability to connect and communicate is slowing down. They need patience. They need the people around them to be patient. Someone who's an adolescent in middle school is living this life with their phone, and they're living a very fast-paced life. They need to slow down, because to really discover a person, to understand the nuances of human behavior, you need to slow down. So the child is forced to engage. The adult is freed from this isolation and is heard. So it's very powerful. Let's move on from that. So I told you I was going to tell you two stories. The first story was Sophie and the story of how she saw differently. She went into an elder care center and she didn't see, well, let's play bingo and be good people and do charity work. She went in there and said, this is fun. This is empowering. I feel great. I'm not doing them a favor. I'm doing myself a favor. She just saw it through a different lens, and she communicated that. And now we have schools, we have waiting lists, truthfully. It's hard to get a Sweet Readers program because so many people want it so fast. That's unheard of. That's because a child set the tone, was a game-changing way of seeing differently. The second story is of Rosemary and Olivier. So this past spring, we did an incredible pilot with the Berkeley Carroll School. We did 9 straight days of immersive engagement. So these kids, 12 kids, selected Alzheimer's because it mattered to them. These are 8th graders. And every day, they were trained in the morning. They had an hour of a multi-generational program where they went to a local adult day program. And then they went and did research. They researched access to care, elder abuse. This is a voiceless, vulnerable population, and these 8th graders went deep to understand the myriad issues with this population, which is soon going to be their parents. In any event, when I went to the day program in advance to kind of just check it out, I saw this woman. And every time I went there, it was the same thing. She was alone. She had been removed from the program, and she actually wasn't alone. She had these 2 men on either side of her, and she was screaming, and she was obviously in pain. And looking at her, you could see she was trapped, and the 2 men were restraining her to try to protect her from herself and from the other people in the program. And every time I went, I felt a little sick, to be honest with you, because I felt like she is in a prison. You can feel it. She feels that she's not being heard, and no one knows how to connect with her. So day 2 of the program, this woman, whose name is Rosemary, walks in and sits down next to Olivier. And the 2 men come in and are about to remove her. And Olivier, very politely, 8th grade Olivier, looks up and says, do you think you could let her stay? I'd like to work with her. So session 1, Rosemary became very calm. Session 2, Rosemary couldn't stop smiling. She was the first one in the room. Session 3, Olivier came up to me at the end and said, did you know that Rosemary was a teacher and that she ran marathons? And the only thing about Rosemary, she really doesn't like to be touched. Well, it turns out Rosemary has a very especially challenging form of dementia called frontotemporal lobe. It's called FTD. It impacts this region of the brain which is involved with judgment and language. And because of this, it's hard to include a lot of these people in social engagements because you don't know what they're going to say. And then sometimes their language faculty is so badly hurt, it's too hard to communicate with them. And this was the case with Rosemary. She just didn't know how to speak. But Olivier figured out how to see her beyond the words. He figured out how to get past it. And so by the end of the program, Rosemary became the biggest advocate for Olivier because at the end, we present, what did you discover about your person? We do all these projects together, and all the elements should be something you discovered. And at the end, Olivier was not going to go first, and Rosemary said, pick him, he's the best. And so the interesting thing was that the two men who had been restraining her all the time watched this entire thing. They had never seen her like this. They got an education from this 8th grader. The story of Rosemary and Olivier teaches us about two of the tenets of sweet readers, listening and respect. To listen to someone, you need to really lean in. You need to notice subtle nuances. You need to make eye contact. You need to connect. And to respect someone, while I grew up thinking respect meant you put someone a little bit on a pedestal because they've got more experience and because they've earned it. But if you look a little deeper, the Latin root of respect, re and spicere, re about going back, and spicere, looking, seeing. So if you think of respect, look again. So if you're going to listen to someone, and if you're going to show them respect, what you really have to do is what Olivier did. You have to look again. And again, keep looking until you see all the different dimensions of a person to find who's in there. So basically, what we've learned through these years is that there's 3 basic needs that we all have. Everyone needs to be seen and heard. It doesn't matter if you're a middle school kid, it doesn't matter if you're a middle-aged person, or if you're an older adult with or without Alzheimer's. And everyone needs to be loved, and everyone needs to matter and to know they have purpose. And what Olivier did for Rosemary is those 3 things. She felt seen, she felt heard, she felt loved, and she felt that she mattered. And guess what? She gave those things right back to Olivier. Olivier was celebrated in his school, he was filmed for a documentary, and he felt worthwhile. So I'm not sure if I want to do this next slide yet. I'm going to take a risk because I don't have the whole slides here. But I want to do this little thing with you. So we've talked about it's remarkable what young people can do. We've shown you a couple of our tips. The next slide is going to be very different than any slide I've shown before. So I want you to brace yourself. And when the slide comes up, I'd like you to just notice how does it feel in your face, and really tune in, how does it feel in your brain? Do you feel a difference in your brain when you see this slide? Okay? Are you ready? Okay, I hope it's the right slide. Yes. So the question is, what did you see when you see this dog? This is my dog. It's Boots. He's a schnoodle. So here's what we've learned. The first tip we teach kids, which every one of you can do with ease, is to smile. It sounds really trite and, oh, it's no big deal. But when you smile, you light up your whole face. In fact, scientifically proven evidence, smiling is good for your brain. So not only when you smile, you light up your face, it's good for your brain, the people you look at, they're going to smile and light up, and it's going to be good for their brain too. So if you come away from today with one thing, you know today if you look someone in the eye, smile at them, and make a connection, you're going to feel great, and so are they. Thank you so much for your time. Have a nice rest of the program.